Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of introducing a host that is about to embark on an epic series that's going to change the way you accelerate. And I have accelerate in quotations. Alan, is that accurate?
That is correct, Russ. We are ready to accelerate some careers. I'm so excited to have Carolina Lasso on the Steer Your Career podcast, the Sick podcast, where we share insights, talk about career decisions, and think really about how people proactively take control and steer their career. So I'll just say a little quick thing about how I know Carolina, and then I'll let her introduce herself. Carolina and I's paths have crossed multiple times. We both worked at American Express. You were there, I think, 2008 to 2011. I was there 2005 to 2011. I'm just looking at LinkedIn. So assuming that LinkedIn is correct, that's what it says.
Right.
And then you went from Amex to Google in October of 2011. I started in May of 2011, and then you were there 7 years. I was there 6 years. So very similar. And then our paths differed after that. But tell the sick audience, who is Carolina?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's sick. It's amazing to be here. And so where to begin? I am originally from Colombia in South America, from Bogata. I grew up in a great family, all girls Catholic school. I had my life very well planned out. And then one day I decided to go to the US to learn English for 6 months. That was my plan. And I ended up getting a scholarship to go to college. And then one thing led to the next, ended up going to get an MBA in New York. That's when I started working at American Express, the financial services. I also worked for a short period of time in media and entertainment. So mostly doing marketing. I fell in love with marketing. It was a surprise. I always thought I would go into macroeconomic development or something like that, like work at the World Bank or something. And one day I did an internship at this TV station, Telemundo in DC. And I was like, this is great. I can have a lot more impact through media, through the proximity to the community, especially the Hispanic community, than working at the World Bank. That was my experience. So I ended up going into marketing, and that's when I ended up at Google in New York, and then I moved to California and really loved the experience working at Google. I learned so much, and everyone was just phenomenal. And also at some point, I burned out. And I always say that I went through a period of time when things were really tough at work. And also, I was also facing some personal situations. And when you combine the two, that's a recipe for some tough times. And it was so bad, Alan, that I ended up taking 6 months off. 6 months off for a person who was valedictorian, straight A's, always had my career as top of mind, to decide to prioritize my well-being over what I thought was my career path or my reputation. Now I know that's not the case, and that actually those 6 months ended up guiding me in the right direction. But at that point, it was hard. But I ended up just taking a leave of absence to do some self-care and some deep exploration of what it was that I really wanted to do with my life and what my purpose was. I use that word frequently. And so when I got back, I decided to go into emotional intelligence. I don't know if you remember this training at Google called Search Inside Yourself. It was the mindfulness-based emotional intelligence and compassionate leadership program for Googlers. Did you ever participate in
I
it?
did
Or
not. I
yeah.
heard about it. I had wanted to do it. But also sometimes I thought, oh, it's kind of like this wishy-washy, like meditation thing. But
Yeah.
I was always tempted by it because I heard so much about it, especially outside the walls of Google. It was so
Totally.
discussed, this program. And well, continue talking about yourself, but we'll definitely go back to that because I know that has informed where you are now too. But
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I took it too because I heard so many great reviews. And my entire life, I've always been into self-help
yeah,
and self-development, meditation, mindfulness. So that was pretty much up my alley.
yeah.
Fell in love with it and then decided to become certified to teach that program.
Hmm.
And through that, I met the founders and the CEO of the organization, and they were looking for someone to lead their marketing. Now, this program born at Google is a nonprofit organization. So I ended up leaving Google, leaving my corporate life to focus on bringing more of these, what would think of human-centered skills to more people and organizations around the world. That's where I work now. And I'll stop there. That's kind of the journey, but happy to talk more in depth about any
Yeah,
of these topics.
there's so much to unpack there, and we will talk about purpose because I know that is really important to you and it should be important to many people. But you mentioned that you got to a breaking point at Google, I think, where you asked for 6 months off. um, I'm how quick, like, I'm guessing you didn't ask for that right away. Was there a time that it was boiling up inside of you that it got to a breaking point? Or if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your thought process of what, even if you don't talk about what happened, but how you, like, the progress to, like, get the courage to go to your manager, I would guess, to ask for the time off. Talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I was experiencing anxiety, high levels of stress. I was going through a divorce at the same time. So as I mentioned, there was like a combination of a lot of different things, but I wanted to stay on. I wanted to, what happened? I didn't want to be seen as weak. And I thought that by talking about mental health, and I thought that by talking about personal issues at work, first of all, never do that, right? You separate the two, is what I used to think.
Yeah.
And so I would never bring it up. And I would, I wrote a book about it, which we can talk about. And I say in the book that I used to wear a mask every day, a smiling mask of someone who had it all together, when deep inside things were shaky. And things were shaky for a long time until I hit rock bottom. And my manager was incredibly supportive. And we had lots of conversations about everything. And it was actually his idea for me to take some time off. And luckily, we were able to find someone to cover my position, all of that. But it's a great reminder of the importance of compassionate, empathetic leaders who can really see the human behind the professional.
Yeah. So you were going through some significant personal issues. You went from American Express, and I've been there, in Amex. I like Amex. I thought that it always felt like a slightly higher paying government job where I could, like, check out at 5 or 6 and not check my BlackBerry because that's what I was on at the time, really, until the next day. And and then Google was a much faster paced culture. How much was it, like, you were going through personal issues? How much was it also the culture of at Google, if any, that was contributing to your burnout?
I think it was the combination of a lot of different factors, but one of them was definitely the pace. And in marketing, we were short-staffed quite frequently and asked to do a lot. And there was also the passion we brought, right? Like, I loved what I did. I cared about what I did. I wanted to do more of it. And the fact that I think there are certain aspects of the organization, or potentially of my team, that were conducive to just having to prove yourself over and over again, and having to show results, and having to in very short increments, really quarterly we would, and that's quite common in many organizations.
OKRs.
Right. So we had very specific OKRs, and I liked that. And they were aggressive. And so it was a little bit of a combination of different factors. I'm also very driven, and I care a lot about my work. But in this case, it was often to a fault.
And that was an interesting culture at Google, because they had SMART goals, and the A in SMART was always ambitious. And usually SMART goals are specific,
attainable,
measurable, attainable,
right.
relevant, and time bound. But they always they substituted ambitious. And the culture at Google was aim for 70%, because if you're hitting 100% of your goals, you're sandbagging it.
Too easy. Yeah.
Which is interesting, because there's people that get into Google are often type A people like you were valedictorian, top of your class. And then you get into Google with a lot of other people, and all of a sudden you're getting a 70 on your OKR.
Is that right?
Like
That's
that.
Right. Right.
How was that for you? So you were at Google for 7 years. At what point in that 7-year career did you take this sabbatical, the 6 months off?
It was on my 6th year. So right toward the end. And I think, I'm getting into the woo-woo stuff here, but I think it was a message, a deeper something that was happening. And I always say life had to shake me hard when it hurt. So I would pay attention to it. And so I would take the time to do the introspection I needed to do to really figure out how I wanted to contribute in the world, and to take action based on that. And so it had to happen. There was no other way. Something needed to happen in my life for me to, figure it out and actually make the change that I needed to make. And this was the way that it got communicated to me. But that often happens. And I hear stories from so many people now that I'm working in this world, of people who have to face whatever it's an illness, a loss, or something quite profound for you to actually say, actually, I don't think I'm in the right path. A friend of mine always says that she was climbing up a ladder, type A as well, really doing the thing, doing everything that was required, climbing up this ladder. And when she got to the end, it was like, what am I doing in this ladder? This is the wrong one. And it's totally fine to have those moments. Because the career is never a straight path, right? It's not a line. You climb up, you realize that's not the thing, you climb down, and it's an ongoing process. And so in retrospect and kind of zooming out a little bit and thinking about it at a more macro level, I think it was just the message that I needed to hear. And that was the way I heard it.
And now you're on the path to flourishing, which is the title of your book. When did you how did that idea come into your mind? When did you write that? And talk a little bit about the inspiration for that book.
So right after the 6 months off that I took, I started writing a lot more. I've always liked writing, but I'm a marketer. I don't consider myself a writer at all, let alone author. But I started writing, and I decided to write in Spanish on personal development topics, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, because I felt that, well, there are a lot of resources in Spanish. There is also a lot of content in English that doesn't get translated or gets lost, or a lot of content that is translated, but then you lose that cultural aspect. And so I wanted to start with my native language. And so I started a blog, nothing, not a big deal. But then in April of 2020, when the pandemic started, our organization, our nonprofit, decided to go on a 4-day week schedule for all of us. And at that moment, I asked myself, what do I want to do with my extra day, my Friday? What do I want to do with my Friday? What's my legacy, especially in this historical moment of the pandemic, which, by the way, I never thought would last so long. But I decided then to start writing. And this calling, this momentum, this desire, burning desire to write a book came out of nowhere, and I decided to do it. But Alan, I had to look for on YouTube, like how to write a book, how to publish a book, like start from scratch, because I had no idea. And I was lucky enough to find a community of writers and authors who started at the same time during the pandemic. And through that and through all my research, I was able to figure out the ins and outs of that. And I started to write, but it was not easy. It's so much work. It's so much work. I don't think I see a book with the same eyes anymore. And it's also incredibly rewarding. And so I started to write, had my doubts, like, I'm not meant for this. Who am I to think I can publish a book? Forget about it, put it on the shelf. And then I would immediately have to go back to it because I couldn't stop writing. The messages, the words would flow in the middle of the night. Like I had to write it. And I shared my story, my personal ups and downs as an immigrant, as a woman, as someone working in tech, as a human being trying to figure out the purpose of life and happiness and what is this all about. And also in the last chapter, I talk about all the struggles I faced during the pandemic, including getting married the day the lockdown started in San Francisco and many other things. But throughout the book, my desire was to share these 7 principles that lead you to a flourishing life. And I have to say, I never liked the books that were like, the 5 keys to your happiness and the 5, no, but I can't help it because through my own personal experience and struggles, I did find these 7 aspects that truly help. They truly help. They're not magical. You have to cultivate them. It's about cultivating them. It's about the practice of those principles. But most importantly, they can be cultivated by anyone, everyone. I truly believe this. So I said, look, I found these concepts, these ideas. I can't keep that to myself. I have to share them. And so I did. And I also wrote the book in Spanish first. And I just finished the translation. So I'm this close to publishing it in English. And it's such a rewarding moment. And it's been a lot of work. And I'm just so excited about sharing this with the world. And I also have to say, it's also a vulnerable moment because I open up so much and I share intimate details about my life that not everybody knows, and let alone, acquaintances and people who are not so close to me. But it's worth it, I think. So, I hope.
I do want to get back to those 7 principles, but there was something first that you talked about the challenges or the path that you took as an immigrant, as a woman, Hispanic woman in tech. So there are not that many immigrant Hispanic women in tech. If you look at that intersectionality of all those 3 things, how was that for you? Like it sounds like it played a part in your story and your purpose in your path. I can't pretend to understand that as a white dude. So I'd love your perspective of how it was and how it still is. You're still in that space working with tech folks as customers, probably.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Tech is definitely an industry we work with a lot. Thanks for the question. It's nuanced. I have to start by saying that sometimes I forget about, I'm not thinking, I'm not walking thinking, I'm a Hispanic woman. I'm just doing the thing. I'm cooking, I'm working, I'm typing emails, right? And then here and there are moments where I'm like, oh, yeah. And it started at an early age. When I first moved to the US, I went to a high school, and I was the only non-white person. And it was also the first time that I realized I was different, because growing up in a country, in a city like Bogata, I was like everyone else. I was part of the majority, and I didn't know anything different. We didn't talk about race a whole lot growing up, which is a shame too. And so I realized, oh, wait, I'm different. What does this look like? And what does it mean? And I was completely naive about many different aspects. And I felt discriminated against, and I felt lonely, and I felt like I didn't belong. And then I was able to figure life out and just adjust to it, make different friends, and open up to different circles.
How did you figure it out? Did you have support, or just came down from the sky all of a sudden you figured it out?
I think having conversations with other people who went through what I had gone through, also other immigrants, mentors, from all races, from all backgrounds, but just people who would guide me and explain to me basic things that I was completely unaware of. So that was helpful. And then just realizing that I didn't belong. Really, I still don't have a sense of belonging in the US, nor do I have it in Colombia, right? I feel like I'm both and I don't belong. And so I guess I belong to both places, right? So always having to adjust, always having to explain, and that is who I am today. And that's okay. And bringing that to the workplace was also important. I think what I struggled with the most was probably language. I'm always cognizant of the fact like, oh, I have an accent. Are they understanding me? Or drafting an email, drafting a document always takes me a little bit longer because I have to, look, is this the right way of saying it? Am I using the right preposition? And so it takes me longer, right, to do it. And I'm a perfectionist, and we're always trying to do things right. So from that perspective, there was that, which potentially other people don't think about or are not aware of. And then, of course, when I started realizing a lot more of the social equity and racial issues, there's so much there to unpack. We could have a conversation just on that topic, but I'm learning so much. I'm learning so much about my own privilege, and I'm learning so much about the moments when I was discriminated against and navigating the two sides. And that's why I started with it's nuanced.
Yeah.
But from a tech perspective, at Google, we had a great group of Latin American people from all functions, and it was amazing, different countries. It was amazing to connect with them, to celebrate our culture, to watch a soccer game together. So it was also beautiful to start highlighting our culture and to see it as the value that it adds, instead of kind of the fear or the doubt that I started with in my career. So now I'm always super proud of saying I'm Colombian, I'm Latin American. I started my introduction with that, right? Because I know how much value diverse perspectives can bring. And this is just one aspect of my personality, right? Diversity is so broad, but I'm really proud of it now, even though at the beginning it was a challenge and it was a surprise and it was difficult to face and to overcome.
How would you compare or contrast it versus American Express, a company that is called American? So, and American Express, it is a global company, but it was so American centric, I found, for me, versus going to Google, which is truly a global company. It still is US based, Mountain View based. But how did you feel like working at American Express? You're Colombian, and the company's name is American Express. Did that mean anything to you, or versus Google?
So interesting. I never even thought about it. You know why? For most of us in Latin America, and I'm not sure it's everybody, but for most of us, we were taught in geography class that America is the continent.
Yeah.
And so I'm American, right? I'm South American, the region, but it's not a different continent. And so American Express is just like, oh yeah, my continent. It's no different. It was probably a little bit more US centric, but we had the luxury of working in Manhattan, which is such a diverse, vibrant city that I actually never felt it. I felt quite at home there, and have such great relationships and friendships from that time that, yeah, I don't think I can't remember anything that stood out from that time.
And going back to your book and the 7 principles that you're talking about, which talk about what they are, how you identify these 7, and how it helps you to thrive.
Yes. Okay. So the 7 principles are pause, taking a pause. What does that mean to all of us? presence, being in the present moment. Everybody talks about that. All the self-help books talk about being in the present moment, but there's a ton of research that validates the importance of that. Quick stat on that. They found that we spend about 47% of our time mind wandering. 47% of our time, our minds and our bodies are not connected. We're doing something, we're thinking about, well, I actually think it's higher. And
Sorry,
the value of
what did you say? I was
what would you say?
Yeah.
Right? Our attention span is so short, and the value of attention to the present, to what we're doing, whether it's eating or having time with our loved one. Anyway, so presence is the second one. The third one is compassion. Compassion to ourselves, compassion to others. That includes self-compassion and appreciation to human beings, kindness, all of that. There's a ton of research on that as well. The fourth one is curiosity. This one I was personally surprised about, but under curiosity, I talk about self-awareness, knowing ourselves, knowing other people, the sense of wonder, the sense of innocence, and the wisdom that comes from that. So we could talk about on curiosity. Then we have perspective. Perspective is, I use that term to reflect the importance of what we focus on and the way we understand and explain our situation. So not only the way we see things, but the story we tell ourselves about whatever is happening in our lives. Then purpose is the next one, a big topic, something I'm really passionate about. And then lastly, acceptance, being able to accept life, being able to be with what is, and a little bit of the stoicism of equanimity and letting life flow, understanding what you can control, what you can't. So those are the 7 principles of that, as I mentioned earlier, we can all cultivate. And by cultivating each one of them, we may not start to notice the big changes, but changes happen. And once again, it's all validated by research. And I can validate it with my own experience as well. And that's what I try to do with the book. It's that combination of my personal experience, my life journey, along with research, along with practices, things that we can all put into practice every day. So it has links to guided meditations and exercises and journaling, a lot of different things to not just keep it as theoretical concepts, but to really apply them in our lives.
How has purpose or other things guided your decisions in your career? So you went from Amex to Google, then after there, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and you've done some side projects along the way as well, besides writing a book. But what have driven some of those decisions, like Amex to Google? What was the key driver for you making that switch?
I think it was taking the time to reflect and think. And there is a good way of thinking about it as we have limited heartbeats on Earth, right? We have a certain number of heartbeats. We don't know what that number is. And the question of how do I want to use those limited heartbeats? What is it that truly moves me? And what am I going to do about it? And I have a big question on what is my legacy for the world? I'm not going to just be here to hang out and eat some good food and connect with some people and then leave. I want to do something. And that's important to me. So being able to develop that self-awareness, that knowledge of what is it that calls me, that pulls me like a magnet. I always feel like we all have those topics that are interesting to us, but not necessarily everybody else. Right? It's like a magnet and it pulls you in. You're like, yeah, I can't help it. Oh yeah, it pulls me in, right? But what is that, right? So developing that knowledge, that wisdom, that connection with your intuition, which speaks volumes to purpose and to what is it that we want to do with our limited heartbeats. So there's that, the question on legacy, the question, how am I using my body, talent, skills, neurons? And then I always think of joy as a great guiding or as a great helper in this process, because it's through joy that we can actually explain or determine or identify what moves us. So I always say, use joy as your compass, whatever brings us joy. But it's not like pleasure, like I'm eating an ice cream, so that brings me joy, so I want to do it. It's that deeper joy, which I prefer to use the word flourishing for that reason. So something deeper that calls you in and makes your eyes shine and ears, right? Maybe the reason why you're doing this podcast. Why did you start this podcast, right? Like something that really calls you. You can't help it. You have to do it. So it's really also about taking action once you identify it.
So yeah, like I just wanted to go to Google for more money, the free food, wear jeans. And I was tired of like not getting promoted or taking so long to get promoted at Amex. How do you find Google? Well, you can Google them, but how did you land there? It's hard to get into Google. I experienced 11 interviews myself, and I had 5 applications. I didn't even get a response until I was able to leverage a network connection to get in there. How did you get noticed by Google?
It was a crazy process due how simple it was. I was living across from Google in New York City, and I didn't even know that was the building. I was literally across the street, 100 steps away, because I counted them. And I didn't know. And then one day I was still at American Express, and I got a message on LinkedIn that they were recruiting. They were looking for a B2B marketer. And I began the process, had 4 interviews. What I was expecting. Nothing crazy, but not straightforward. I prepared a lot for them, and it happened. And then my first day at work, I just crossed the street and I was there. It was amazing. I make fun of it because it was actually closer for me to go to Google than to go to any restaurant in New York City. So I would go there just for food and then come
Yeah,
back.
no, it was great. It's great food.
Amazing. Yeah. So many perks.
So you're at Google for almost 7 years. You took 6 months off as a hiatus. Did you get promoted during your time at Google?
I did once.
Okay. How was that process for you? How like the way Google process works for promotion? If you're not in the engineering space is a different way. But for promotions, you need get approved from a calibration process, and you have your manager's support. But talk about how did you get promoted in the time frame that you wanted? Was it at the right speed, or were you waiting for it for a while? And talk about how you got promoted at Google.
That first promotion, I think, happened at the right time. Of course, we all want to get promoted sooner, but it happened at the right time. I was very lucky to have a manager that supported me and that guided me through the process, because it was very different. In my mind, you get promoted when there's a job with a larger scope or with a higher level of seniority, and you apply for that role, and then it happens. But you're right, at Google, it happened. I don't know how it is today, but it used to happen twice a year only. And so we all joked that the stars
Twice a
had
year
to align.
only, but some companies do it once a year.
That's true. Yeah. So at Google, it was twice a year, and you had to show your projects. And as a manager, you would have to put together this huge package in front of the committee and the calibration group. And it was new to me, that entire process. But once again, I counted on the support of a lot of people, including my manager and their manager. So that worked out really well. And then I waited for a long time for my next promotion. And I don't know if this would have happened or not, but my manager, the moment I left, had said that we would would drop my name because you can't even say you would get promoted. They would drop my name or they would consider me for promotion. The quarter I left, and that one I waited for a while. But so it didn't happen. I left, and then you realize promotions are meaningful within each organization, and then you leave and it's a completely different thing and maybe not so meaningful.
And have you been an IC and a manager, or just IC? Like IC is individual contributor, but have you managed people?
Yes, I have. Yeah. And
At
it's
Google?
something I truly enjoy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you manage people at American Express as well?
A small group, yes, toward the end. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What did you like? You care a lot about, like, you're doing search inside yourself, and it sounds like you've had some good mentors as well, and some support. What's been your management philosophy? And you're managing team now as marketing director in search inside yourself.
We're a small group too, but yeah.
What's been your philosophy about management? Like, you've mentioned a few managers that have been supportive of you, but what's been like, what's your philosophy around management, and how aligned is that with those 7 principles that you talk about in terms of finding purpose?
What a great question, Alan. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about, both for my own experience, my own work, and also a little more kind of academically thinking about what makes a good leader, what makes a good manager, because we definitely need more good managers in the world. And I think there are a few things. So the first is this shift toward more kind of female leadership. And by that, I don't mean necessarily led by women, but, this notion of more empathetic, more caring, human, emotionally intelligent, and obviously anybody, both men, women, anyone can demonstrate these skills. But
and I think collaborative too. I've always noticed a stark difference in general, and it's a stereotype, but women being much more collaborative than competitive. And it's so important with these large matrix organizations to not mark your territory, but instead kind of share ideas and collaborate. And I don't know, like, I don't know if there's research on it that women are just naturally more collaborative, but I've always found that as a huge benefit of working for women.
Yeah, I'm glad you've had that experience. I don't know if we have data. I haven't seen anything myself. And I do think, once again, that female leadership can be portrayed by both men and women, or non-binary, right? But I do think there's something quite powerful there. Here's the deal. People want to be seen. People want to be appreciated. People want to feel fulfilled at work. It's no longer enough to get a salary, especially the new generations, right? We're saying that they're not going to stay for a long time in a place where they don't feel seen and appreciated and have that sense of belonging, nor in a place where their manager is just after outcomes and productivity. The human aspect of all of us is so important, and it's such a big priority that I do think that as leaders, we need to prioritize that. You can tell, probably, that's why I'm so passionate about working where I work, because that's what we do. We help train organizations and individuals with these emotional intelligence skills that can truly make a difference. And so I think compassionate leadership is so important. And I remember toward the end at Google, I would meet with my team, and often the conversations became like psychological sessions, right? And as a manager, you really need to pay attention to the subtle symbols and signals and messages that are in between, and really trying to understand what's happening with that other person. What are their interests? How to read them, how to then use those interests to shape their projects. And I remember loving doing that part, meeting with all of my team members, and we would draw on the whiteboard, like lots of different frameworks, and we would identify their skills, what brought them joy. I would literally ask that question. write down all the things that bring you joy, from the small projects to the big ones, to the macro level ones. And then how do we combine that with your skills, right? So when you combine those two, your skills and what brings you joy, what you enjoy doing, that's powerful. That's really powerful. And then the areas of development, right? So what are the areas that bring you joy, but we still need to develop? And then what's that path? I remember loving doing that. And that's related to the chapter on purpose. And I actually have a framework that I share in the book on what has helped me find the projects that I enjoy doing, that I can also do well at, and that builds confidence. And so you do more of that. It's a great virtuous cycle.
You've had an amazingly successful career. Like it looks like 18 years or so since Telemundo. And how much of that do you think was, well, a lot, like how much of that was planned versus serendipitous? And as you're thinking about your next 18 years, do you have a plan for the next 18? Do you think that will, like thinking back in the last 18, how much of that was planned?
I don't think a whole lot of the outcomes were planned, but I do think a lot of the feelings were planned. And by that, I mean, I wanted to work in an organization where I could have these more in-depth conversations and admire my coworkers and value human skills and value well-being. And I didn't know what that was going to look like, right? But I did know I wanted to be in that environment. I thrive in that environment. So that's my current job. Google came out of nowhere, and I'm so thankful for having worked in that organization. I met incredible people and learned so much. And again, I didn't know it was going to be Google, but I did know I wanted to be in a place where I could deliver what I could feel. There's a term we use at work, well utilized, right? Where I could just work on big projects and see the output of my work and meet great people and work together and whiteboard and have big ideas and make that happen. And that happens at Google. So in a way, I think it's about that deeper desire that I had all along. And I don't know what, and then the outcomes happened. So in terms of the next 18 years, I haven't asked myself that question, but I do know what feelings I want to have. And I think at this stage, I'm more interested in giving back. I'm exploring ways to continue to teach. I love teaching. I teach marketing. I teach emotional intelligence. I teach the principles to flourishing. So that will likely continue to happen, but there's something bigger I want to create with my husband, likely. And I don't know what that will be, but likely on the side, a philanthropic project or something like that. We'll see. So the feelings are there of giving back, of once again leaving a legacy, of helping while having fun and enjoying projects and continuing to whiteboard, because I love big ideas and big thinking, and just flowing with life while focusing on those emotions, those desires, those deeper longings that I have, and seeing how we can make them a reality.
You like teaching, you like managing. What are some tips and advice that you give people, either when they come to you or they're on your team? What are some great words of wisdom that you give people as they're navigating their careers? And you think about it as purpose. Careers are often quite, actually, what's your thought of a career aligned, like interactions with purpose? Where do those interact and where do they differ?
So I think every single person has a purpose. Some people call it a calling or a mission. We can call it whatever. But I think we all have something. And so it's about finding what it is, determining whether or not it's related to your career, Your purpose may be related to your kids, your grandparents, something completely outside of work. And then taking action so you can align your life with your purpose, whatever it is. It is often related to what we do in our day-to-day. Mm-hmm. And so whether we're at work, self-employed, retired, whatever, it's what we do in our most like 6 to 8 hours, right? Productive hours. So for that, as I mentioned earlier, I think the statement I use is use joy as your compass. Mm-hmm. Do more of the things that bring you joy, that deeper joy, that fulfillment, flourishing type of joy, right? And that may be that you have your job, and that's what helps with your financial goals or your intellectual goals. Great. But then let's say you love playing music. And so maybe that's what you do every night and on weekends. And that's perfectly fine. Just try to do more of it because it brings you joy. It allows for greater well-being. And that allows you to be more productive at work or to understand the role of your job as it relates to your higher purpose. If it's not part of it, if it's not 100% it, let's say, right? But to do that, we need to spend a good chunk of time pausing and in presence. Those are foundational. They're the first steps, because once we pause, we spend time with ourselves, we go into reflection, introspection, we allow for silence and stillness. That's when the messages come, right? Because they're not always intellectual or verbal. Often they're more on the intuition side of things or subtle messages. And then you start realizing how powerful they can be. That wisdom from within can be quite powerful when we pay attention to it, but we need to open up the spaces for that. So I hope that helps, even though I went a little like abstract.
Yeah, no, it does, like kind of use joy as your North Star to kind of anchor you and what brings you joy. Is there any, like, we talked about your background, an immigrant Hispanic woman. Is there anything different that you advise people that are in that situation where you're looking around, like, I don't know, Salesforce had 4.5% of their population Latinx. I don't know like what Google's was. And I'm sure women was even smaller than 4.5%. And I'm sure immigrant women were even smaller than that. Is there any additional like advice or guidance that you give people, because you dealt with obstacles, challenges? Is there advice that you give differently there, or is it the same? Just search for your joy. And I'm simplifying it because that's how I think in my head. But is there any different advice that you would give for people that are also dealing with these burdens of, not burdens, but just the intersectionality and being in the minority?
At a higher level, and in terms of like the 7 principles of flourishing, they apply to everybody. I feel they're universal. And in the book, I share how they apply to me as an immigrant Latina. So I would say the only thing I've noticed is that often as immigrants of any background, or as minorities, we may have extra weight on our shoulders to maybe prove ourselves or to meet requirements from our families who worked so hard to get us here, or to go back to our countries and show what we were able to accomplish, or to support our families in other places. So that's the only thing that I've noticed is a little different. And of course, even within Latin America, we're so diverse that it's very hard to generalize. But just that message of you are you, follow your path, and thinking of how can you take off that weight off your shoulders and do you, right? Yeah. Follow your flourishing path yourself.
Awesome. So last question. So you've had phenomenal career. You like to teach. If people want to learn from you, where can they best find you?
Wonderful. So I have a website, carolinalasso.com. If you're interested in buying the book, once it's available, you can find it at thepathtoflourishing.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Caro Lasso.
Not on Google Plus.
Wait, what is that?
Yeah.
Oh, let me get my Google glasses.
Awesome, Carolina. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate hearing your story, hearing, like you're so thoughtful about purpose and paring it down to 7 principles, and it's guided you, and I'm sure it's guiding a lot more people. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your purpose.
Thank you so much for the invitation, for everything that you're doing.
That wraps up another remarkable episode of the Sick Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. That's sickpodcast.com, and it's SYCK. Alan, tell the audience about the newsletter they can sign up for.
The newsletter rocks. Check out the accelerator, XLR8R. You will get great tips about your career. You'll get honest insights. You will get the occasional pet picture, and you will learn how to take proactive control and take charge of your career.
Very good. Very good. That's sickpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You are going to love the next one.